Hello Internet, welcome to the channel. My name's Frankie, and in today's video we are revisiting Primate Isles after our stay at our Halloween zoo, and we are going to be building for the Borneo orangutan along with the Gibbon. But to begin with, we are over in our chimpanzee enclosure, which is the last habitat built for Primate Isles, and since the release of that video we have got the tropical pack, which included the red river hogs, and these have some cross-species enrichment for the chimpanzees, meaning that if you add them to their enclosure, you're going to get a little bit of a boost to their welfare for having this other species in there with them, because they like to live alongside each other in the wild, and it helps with their life in captivity as well. So what we're going to be doing now is just kind of setting up the enclosure a little bit, adding some enrichment items for the red river hogs, and then we're going to pop a few in and just have a nice little addition to the zoo. This isn't the main build, obviously. I just thought it would be a cool little thing to show you just before we dive into the main build. So yeah, we now have some lovely red river hogs as well in this zoo. Now let's get on to the main event, and that is a habitat for our orangutans. Now, from the get-go, I knew that I wanted to create an island for our orangutans to live on, and the reason for that is not only because I really like how they look and I think island kind of habitats are really effective, but also because of where the animals live in the real world as well. The Borneo orangutans live on the island of Borneo, which is an Indonesian island, and they are pretty well known for being awful swimmers. These animals do quite often drown if they attempt to swim, which is why they are kind of locked onto this one island. They're kind of secluded and cut off from other populations of different species of orangutan, just because they do not swim too well. And if you've been watching Asia on BBC iPlayer here in the UK, it's a new David Attenborough documentary. I literally watched an Asian episode. Well, I watched an episode of it today, which was talking about the ocean and stuff, and it was talking about how there is an extremely strong current that passes through these particular islands that create some of the strongest whirlpools and rapids in the world. It is one of the strongest currents on the planet, and therefore if an animal actually did try to get off the island that is as big as an orangutan and couldn't swim, it would basically, it's almost definitely going to drown. So islands are kind of thematic for the orangutans. So with that in mind, I decided to build an island in the way that I normally would, and that is to just do a bit of sculpting to kind of decide where the water's going to go, and then surround the edge with a bunch of boulders to try and blend it in. And another thing that I knew that I wanted to do with this habitat is to create an abandoned temple in the middle. Now, I could have built this from scratch, but there are some beautiful temple blueprints in the blueprint section of the tropical pack, so I decided to go ahead and use some of the wall pieces and stuff and just dot about a perimeter for this abandoned temple that has fallen to ruin over however many years, and then use a bunch of the blocks, sink them into the ground, copy and paste them about and all that to create some fallen rubble at the borders of these walls as well. That will just help to make it look quite realistic, like it has fallen apart a little bit. And then we're going to move on to some plant life and stuff. We're going to use the massive climbing trees. You've got 3 trees that are kind of fixed together with loads of vines and rocks and stuff, and it is designed for brachiating animals, which is things like monkeys and whatnot that will traverse these climbable areas by swinging with their arms. The Gibbon does it in particular. You'll get some nice shots of that in the cinematics at the end, but these types of climbing frames are perfect for them. And with most of my builds in our zoos, I like to really lean on this kind of natural looking aesthetic. So we're going to use as many trees as possible to try and meet their climbing needs rather than climbing frames. The orangutans do actually need a lot more climbing space than I initially put in, so we do end up having to add just a couple small climbing frames at the back of this habitat as well, just to kind of accommodate that climbing need. We're also going to add a hard shelter at the back, because apparently the tree coverage does not work the same way it does for some animals as a hard shelter. So we're going to add a log shelter at the back. We're going to sink the concrete base into the floor so it can't be seen, and any bits that do poke through we can just cover with shrubs and stuff. At the front of the habitat we can use a null barrier to ensure that those rocks and stuff do actually register as the edge of the habitat, and once you've introduced the animals we can check their traversable area to make sure they can't climb out. The Lara Gibbon in particular can swim, so we're going to need to make sure that we get rid of any escape points. And to do that, we're just going to change the height of some of the rocks. When you do have an animal come in, just go over to its heat maps and look for traversable area. Then any areas that it can escape will be clearly marked for you. And then you can just make your adjustments as needed to make sure the animals can't escape. Another thing that you have to bear in mind when you're building an island habitat is that our keepers need to be able to access the island. It's all very well and good having a lovely pretty habitat, but if the keepers can't get to where all the feeding items are, then the habitat won't function. So I installed a tiny bridge, which I believe is from the East Asia theme, I believe. Just popped that on top of some rocks and stuff to bridge the gap between where the gate is and the central island, ensuring that our keepers can get to the centre and top up all of their food and their food enrichment items as well, and of course hoover up all of their poop. Having more than one animal in here does mean that you have to do a bit of a balancing act when it comes to the terrain distribution needs, because the orangutans liked a little less grass than the Lara Gibbon did. They wanted more soil, so even though I thought it was all perfect, I did have to make some adjustments afterwards. When it comes to the terrain and plant life, I just really want to make sure it's quite dense. We're going to use as many trees as we can at the back of the habitat to mask the wooden barrier that we put in place earlier, and we're also going to use a bunch of really tall trees on the central island to hopefully allow for a bit of climbing. We're going to use a bunch of big bushes and stuff for a bit of ground coverage and whatnot, and we're going to use some ferns and stuff as well to add a much needed dose of colour. There aren't going to be any really bright flowers here, so instead we're going to be going for variation in tones of green. We want lots of bright greens and stuff as kind of accents around darker areas like the temple walls. When it comes to visibility for our guests, I'm just creating a really basic elevated path around the perimeter of this habitat, adding a few bins and benches and obviously some education boards as well. I'm not going to do anything fancy with this. I'm going to leave it really plain and quite bare because there's a large area between this habitat, the chimpanzee habitat, and the back of Gorilla Kingdom, which is going to need filling in. This is going to be an area that I'm undecided on what to do with it as of yet, so I'm leaving this walkway quite plain so that if I choose to kind of change it up a little bit, it's easy enough to reverse and then do something a bit more impressive later. Now that's kind of it for the talking for this video. I really hope you've been enjoying it, and if you have watched this far, please make sure to subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.